Hello and welcome. It's an important moment for any president, a first national primetime TV address. And when Joe Biden spoke to the American people, front and centre was his plan to overcome the coronavirus and return to normal life. Well, the president predicted that 100 million vaccines would be administered by his 60th day in office, 40 days ahead of his own self-proclaimed schedule. Mr. Biden said he would make the vaccine available to all adults by May and urged people to take it up. He said he was hopeful that by July the 4th, small groups could meet again and celebrate Independence Day. But he called for continued vigilance against the virus, which has now infected more than 29 million people in the US. It's left more than 530,000 people dead, more than twice as many deaths as the next hardest hit country, Brazil. Here's our North America correspondent, David Willis.
So, thank you for being here.
Joe Biden called it historic legislation that would rebuild the backbone of the country. It represents the biggest increase in federal assistance in generations.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
He re-emerged against a backdrop of flags from all the states in the union to talk about ramping up this country's vaccination program. And for the first time, to hold out the hope of a world that once seemed almost unimaginable, a world post-COVID-19.
When I came into office, you may recall, I set a goal that many of you said was that kind of way over the top. I said I intended to get 100 million shots in people's arms in my first 100 days in office. Tonight, I can say we're not only going to meet that goal, we're going to beat that goal. Because we're actually on track to reach this goal of 100 million shots in arms on my 60th day in office. No other country in the world has done this. None. Now, I want to talk about the next steps we're thinking about. First, tonight, I'm announcing that I will direct all states, tribes, and territories to make all adults, people 18 and over, eligible to be vaccinated no later than May 1. Let me say that again. All adult Americans will be eligible to get a vaccine no later than May 1.
The hope was to return to some semblance of normality by the 4th of July, a day he suggested that could also mark America's independence from the coronavirus. Roughly 10% of the population here has so far been vaccinated against the virus, but millions more doses will soon be available. And the Biden administration is looking to more mobile vaccination sites and thousands more active duty troops to speed up the process.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
Overcoming skepticism about the vaccine is still a challenge, though, and 4 of the president's predecessors, with the notable exception of Donald Trump, have now come together to spread the message.
I carry a card in my pocket with the number of Americans who have died from COVID to date. It's on the back of my schedule.
America has seen more deaths from COVID-19 than any other country in the world, approaching 530,000. President Biden said the suffering could soon start to come to an end and the world's largest economy could start to rebuild. But there remain plenty of obstacles ahead. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, earlier I spoke to CBS's Deborah Alfarone in Washington, and she told me how President Biden's speech was different in style to the former President Trump.
He really never mentioned his predecessor by name, right? But he did use his words to strike a contrast from other speeches that you might have heard from former President Trump. So at one point he promised that he would always tell the truth, he'd always be truthful, and he would never be dishonest to the public. So just putting that out there strikes a contrast. And so he was referring to denials for days, weeks, then months at the start of the pandemic. But again, never said former President Trump's name. He also talked about how he wanted to let people know, he was discussing the collective suffering, the collective sacrifice that people have made in the last year, including himself in on that. And, oftentimes in the past, former President Trump would talk about his accomplishments. There wasn't so much a discussion of that specifically, but he did, of course, talk to the vaccine rollout, and he did mention in passing the coronavirus relief plan, but not in a way to really take credit for it, more discussing it in passing.
And Deborah, this vaccination goal that the president has set, that's going to give a lot of people a lot of hope. But how easy is it going to be for him to deliver that, given the scepticism still amongst Trump supporters?
There is absolutely skepticism. You're absolutely right, Geeta. And so a new CBS poll shows that more than 1/3 of Republicans really don't want the vaccine. And it looks like the Biden administration isn't necessarily going to try and convince people who might otherwise not be convinced, but rather they're going to put all their efforts into getting this information to minority and underprivileged communities that are really often overlooked and, frankly, mistreated by the medical community, many people say. So they're going to be doing things like trying to get the vaccine in rural areas. They're going to be having a communications campaign to get that information out there and really just talk about the misinformation and try to get the facts out there. You know, one other thing that President Biden said was that, he received the vaccine. He did so on camera to let people know that it's safe. We hear that former President Trump also received the vaccine, but he really hasn't commented on that. That is a missed opportunity, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci, who we hear from so often, really to let people know that he also might feel that it's safe.
Deborah Alfarone there from CBS talking to me from Washington.